Not going to give a big introduction, but Matt Kerr.
Thanks. Good morning, and thanks for coming. Just a little bit about myself. I've been in the executive search field. I think I first got into it in '84, well before LinkedIn, when all we had was just a name and a title to go on. So it was a lot of poking around, a lot of research. Did that for probably 4 or 5 years, and then actually went into more of a corporate role. I was with Motorola for 15 years in talent acquisition, and then more in the HR biz partner roles. Ran HR for an engineering firm, started my own search firm, spent 6 years at a company called BPI Group running their North American search practice, and then in January of this year I went over to a company called Kensington International. Kensington has retained search, executive outplacement, executive coaching, and they also own another search firm called the Laramie Group. So right now I'm running the search operations across 2 platforms, managing all the associates, have an overall view of what's going on from a search perspective, a research perspective. And so I wanted to share this presentation with you. I've done it several times. First things first, you guys can download this presentation, okay? I've uploaded it to the cloud. It's in PDF. And I'll give you the link if you can't see it from there. But I use a link shortening program called Bitly. Some of you may have heard of tinyurl or Bitly to shorten links. It's http:// the word Bitly, bit.ly / and then I decided to use the all caps FEI -LI for LinkedIn -2015. Make sense? Okay. This is going to take you to, I have an Amazon Prime account. I uploaded the PDF. So when you get there, you'll see it. If you click on it, it may at the bottom say download. You got to hit download and you'll get the PDF. Okay? So I thought I'd share that way so you have a takeaway. There's a lot of screenshots in here. I don't know how well versed people are on LinkedIn. I'm assuming that everybody has a basic profile. I'm going to talk today and give you kind of the perspective of somebody that is using it to try to find you. Okay? So really today, there's 3 things that I want to try to do. It's 1, talk about the profile in terms of optimizing it for searchability. 2, so you could lose at the game of hide and seek. Okay, there's a lot of people out there that have profiles on LinkedIn and we can't find them, can't find the right people. 2 is, how do you use the LinkedIn search function to build and leverage your professional network, right? Because one of the things, especially people going through outplacement, if you talk to your coach, they'll say, well, you must network. Well, that's great. Who do I talk to, right? 3rd thing is wrapping metrics around your networking efforts, okay? And I want to give a little credit to my friend Paul Dusky at Robertson Lowestutter because years ago he kind of put together a score thing, and I think it's important to get your arms and you guys are metrics driven. You've always done metrics, right? So put some KPIs around networking. First part, if you like the graphic, we want you to lose at the game of hide and seek, okay? There are a couple, this is a little awkward because I'm looking at the screen here. One of the things that I've noticed on LinkedIn profiles is that people have a tendency just to cut and paste, and I think many people are guilty of this. They work on a resume. They like the resume. They work very hard on the summary of the resume. And what they'll do is they'll cut it and paste it into their LinkedIn profile or the whole resume into a LinkedIn profile, okay? Something to think about. When you write your resume, typically you're doing a lot of work around action-oriented statements. You're using a lot of action verbs, right? Using a lot of numbers to show your accomplishments. You have to think about your profile more as a honeypot, because what you're really trying to create is a branding statement out there that is going to attract recruiters and researchers Many of the retained search firms, the way it works is somebody will come up with will bring the assignment in, and then they meet with the research manager and the associate, and they start doing research, and they start targeting companies, and they start trying to target people. And they start getting very specific in terms of, got to have a person out of this industry, out of this size company, got to be private equity backed, got to be publicly traded, got to be privately held. So all these things start to come into play. And many times the recruiters are out there just trying to figure out who are these companies. They're struggling because sometimes the clients are vague and say, get us somebody out of professional services. What does that mean, right? So anyway, what you're trying to do here is create a honeypot to attract the recruiters, the sourcers, and the researchers. I'm not going to go, this is just a piece for your takeaway. These are the screenshots I'm talking about, but really before you start making changes to your LinkedIn profile, you're going to want to go into your settings and turn certain things off. Because if you don't turn certain things off, every time you make a change to your profile, it's going to notify everybody in your first degree that you changed something. And it's going to constantly ping people. Today, Jim Patterson changed his job description. Today, Jim Patterson changed, right? So you get all these pings in the network, and people are going, what the hell, what is Jim doing? Is he looking? So especially if you're gainfully employed and you want to make some changes, you probably want to shut off certain functions. And that's what these are. This portion of the presentation tells you about, and this is an eye test, tells you about certain things to turn off. Okay, so I'm going to keep going, and you can download this and look at it later. You'd be surprised on LinkedIn. I've seen people that don't have all these buttons checked. When you go to look at your public profile and your settings, I've seen people that only have the basics checked. They're trying to figure out why nobody's finding them. Make sure you check all the appropriate boxes, okay? And do join groups. LinkedIn allows you to join up to 50 groups. And sometimes the sourcers and the researchers aren't even using LinkedIn. What they're doing is they're using Google, and they're using the site command, and they're doing what's called X-ray. And they're actually looking at LinkedIn through the eyes of Google. Yes?
Matt, if you check on your own URL
Yep.
to your LinkedIn,
Yep.
you see your public profile, correct?
Anybody who checks on your...
Okay. But I mean, so I'm just curious about these settings. Frankly, I don't know if I checked all those, but I've gone to look at my own profile.
Is anything missing?
No.
Then you must have checked all the appropriate boxes, okay? And then the other thing is I see people that are not using, you can create a vanity URL, okay? Because normally when you join LinkedIn, it gives you some really long alphanumeric thing. And if you can get, you can try to put in, it's usually linkedin.com/in/whatever you put in there. If you have an unusual name, your odds are better. Your name is Mark Johnson. Good luck. It's like having a Gmail, right? So you have to, you may want to use first initial, middle initial, last name, right? I'm surprised at the number of people that will put in first initial, last name, and then their year of their birth. I'm like, really? I mean, you see that in emails too, right? It surprises me. But I will tell you, you want to join some groups because many times the research managers and the research associates are going out using Google, and they're looking at saying, let's say I need a chief auditor, right? A chief audit manager, and they'll be looking for people. They know that ducks fly with other ducks, so they may be going out looking at groups on LinkedIn, and it might be, the International Audit Committee, you know what I'm saying, that has 30,000 members, and they may do a Boolean search on Google to say, show me all the people, especially if they're not using a tool like LinkedIn Recruiter, because not all search firms are on the Recruiter platform. It's fairly expensive. I think today if you want 8 seats and multiple postings, it's probably for 2 years it's about 65 grand. So some of the search firms are boutiques. Some of the search firms are just one person, right, working out of a Regis space. And they're using maybe the professional edition, and they don't have the ability to get into all the different pieces that LinkedIn has to offer. So they're using Boolean search strings, and they're using Google. And they're looking at groups. So don't be afraid to join a few groups that are germane to, what you do, right? And I would be careful of showing all groups, because maybe you're passionate about a certain subject and maybe it could be controversial. So you may not always want to, you can always check, you can always check the group that you're involved in to whether or not it shows up, okay? Questions so far? Okay. This is what I was talking about, the public profile URL and the custom URL. You may want to create one of those if you haven't already. It's great to have on the back of a business card. It's great to have at the bottom of your email when you send an email out. Mine always has my LinkedIn. It lets people know that I'm on LinkedIn. It lets them know that hey, maybe I should connect with Matt, right? You should be putting this on your if you're currently a transition person and you're really heavily networking, it should be on your card to let folks. Exactly, the signature block is what I'm talking about, right. But you could also put it on if you have a networking business card, right? I'm going to put that on there. Again, this is another screenshot on the settings. Select the type of message that you're willing to receive. You may have seen this before where it says the type of messages you're willing to receive. Check the ones that are appropriate. Now, I see people fill in this box that says advice to people who are contacting you, right? And people will say, I love to collaborate on different projects. Please email me. And then they don't tell you their email, right? So that means that the search firm or recruiter has to either burn an in-mail, and maybe it's somebody that is working on a search that doesn't have a lot of in-mails, right? So trying to figure out how to get a hold of you. It's even more difficult if the person's in transition, because I got to be honest with you, when our associates are trying to get a hold of candidates, the first thing they do is Google the company and call the company. They call them directly, right? And we may get they're not here, or we get a dead voicemail, or we can't get a hold of you. Now what? We could try to send an in-mail. We're seeing sometimes that people will have profiles and then they don't, for some reason they have an email that's tied to an account that they don't always look at, right? So we like to see an email somewhere in the profile. To be honest with you, if you put an email in your profile in a section that's not designed for it, you're technically violating LinkedIn's terms of service. Some people will put it up in the summary. That really violates LinkedIn terms. If you read the terms of service, it violates it. I would argue that this doesn't, where it says advice to people who are contacting you. Maybe a good thing to do is to put in there, for networking purposes, Jim Patterson can be reached at jim.patterson@gmail.com. I'm sorry, Jim, I keep using your name. Well, but anyway, but the reason you want to do that, there's two reasons you want to do that. One is, first of all, you don't want to make it difficult for a recruiter. You don't want them to jump through hoops to try to get you, right? Secondly, have you ever done a search on LinkedIn where you find somebody that you're interested in and it says LinkedIn member and it suppresses their name? You ever seen that? That means they might be outside of your third degree, right? And so LinkedIn likes to play the big brother and say, hey, you know what, we're not going to show that to you. And so now you're looking at a profile and you don't even know the person's name, right? If you put your name down here for networking purposes, Jim Patterson, now you look at the profile and now you know it's Jim Patterson, because they can't suppress what's in that box. Make sense? Now some of you may not want to put out an email that is your personal email because it's near and dear to you and you're worried about spam, right? And I like putting first name dot last name, because if somebody Googles you, Google will always it always pings LinkedIn. It always looks at LinkedIn. And so if your name is in your profile several times, and somebody does, our natural inclination, if somebody calls you, or I mean, if you were to call me and leave a message, the first thing I'm going to do is Google you, right? So usually LinkedIn results show up at the top of a Google. But if your name is in your profile several times, you're probably going to be the first person that's at the top, right? So if you say for networking purposes, first name, last name can be reached at first name dot last name. Now it's in there twice, plus it's at the top of your profile, right? So that's one way to think about it. If you're worried about getting too much spam, and I'm assuming that most people here have a smartphone. I found a nifty little mail program called mail.com, and they actually have an app on the iPhone as well as Android, so you could have a separate one, right? But if you go in there, it says desired email address. Try first name dot last name, and there's mail.com, there's a drop-down box here. There's got to be 150 different extensions. I think one of them is at accountant.com, right? Engineer.com, toothfairy.com, I wouldn't do that one. But mail.com or at email.com, so you got a nice kind of clean, especially if you've been through Gmail and you know that somebody probably has taken your name. Maybe you create another email address, and you can have multiple email addresses tied to your LinkedIn profile. If you go into your settings, and actually LinkedIn suggests that you do this, is that you have more than one email address tying to your LinkedIn, right? All you do is, once you create this, go into LinkedIn, add it in there. It'll send an email to your new email address. It'll say, this is LinkedIn, did you mean to do this? Verify it, you verify it, and now it's listed as a secondary account, right? I've seen a number of people anybody have duplicate LinkedIn accounts? It happens all the time, where people will have an account with their company and they'll use their company email address, and then all of a sudden they leave the company and then they really want to get into LinkedIn and they forgot their password. And they say, okay, we'll send the reset back to your company email address, which is dead because they're gone, right? And so they get stuck, and you see people with multiple profiles, right? So you always want to have a secondary email address. And this is just an idea. Plus, you can go on to, like I said, the App Store, and you can put it on your iPhone, you can put it on your Android, and then you've got a mail.com that the only thing it's for is for LinkedIn. And if you say for networking purposes, Jim Patterson can reach at jim.patterson@mail.com. You know it's coming, it's going to go there, and then you'll see it on your iPhone or your Android. Just an idea if you don't want to get your personal email address out there. I wanted to talk about photos. You know, no fish unless you're a pro angler or you work for Bass Pro Shop, right? This guy's a chemical person. Okay, so he caught a fish. Same thing with selfies. They're horrible. You know, here's a person that's a CFO. You know, it's not Facebook, okay? You don't want to be cropped out. Make sure that the photo is professional. Something like that, right? Professional headline, you got 120 characters. This is very important real estate. My suggestion is that you put in there, because recruiters and sourcers and researchers, their natural inclination is, go find me a director of finance. So what do they put in under title? Director, finance, or DIR finance, or senior manager, or SRMGR, right? Because people use all different funky titles. We're putting in the word chief finance, not even spelling the word financial, because some people put in chief finance officer as opposed to chief financial officer, right? So we put in chief finance with nothing after it, right? Or CFO, or CAO, or chief accounting officer, right? So we put in all different variations of a title you can think of, right? But you want to put in, and I'll give you an example. I had a friend of mine who ran human resources for an energy company, and she called me one day and said, I'm not getting a lot of hits on, because you can see if people are looking at you, right? And I said to her, don't you run HR, right? You report to the CEO, you're the chief human resources officer. Yeah, and I said, then why does it say that you're the chief cultural officer? Because they gave her that title. And I said, how about doing this? How about doing CHRO, space vertical line, Vice President Human Resources, space vertical line, Chief Cultural Officer, right? So give me industry standard titles, because we are looking for industry standard titles. We're not looking for the funky things that your company calls them, right? Am I right? Yeah. I mean, you get funky stuff. Some people will actually, if they don't have a lot of connections, they may put their name in there as well. because they're worried about their name getting suppressed. I've seen that as well, where they were actually in their 120 character headline. It's got your name at the top, but if they don't have a lot of connections, they're worried about it getting suppressed, so they put their name in there again, space, vertical line, and then the titles that they have held or could hold. You got a professional designation, you might want to put it in there too. Some people will put in MBA, some people will put in CPA, right? So if there's an industry designation tied to your title that you want to preserve, you may want to put it up there. Make sense? So, summary, again, a lot of people like to lift stuff right out of their resume. My suggestion, because when people are writing the resume, they're not thinking about key terms. They're not thinking about the nouns. We are searching for you based on key terms. Those key terms tend to be nouns. Okay? So think about industry vernacular. Think about functional vernacular. Words like Gap, Sox, Sarbanes-Oxley, right? Think about the stuff that is germane to what you guys do. If I was sitting in a staff meeting with you, I might need an acronym directory, right? What is he saying again, right? So think about the business acronyms that you guys use. Think about the terminology, right? So this was just an example. And what's interesting is I'll see people say, seasoned financial executive. Nobody is searching for the term seasoned financial executive. Put in there CFO or Chief Financial Officer or Director of Finance. This one starts off Director, Finance space. I'm a big fan of the vertical line, which is right above the backslash key on your keyboard. It also, when you're doing a Boolean search, it's the or symbol. When we're using actually Boolean terminology. So Director, Finance space vertical line, Finance Manager experienced in a full spectrum of financial leadership, including identifying, hiring, and developing more than 20 managers, 75 accounting and finance associates. I'm using nouns, accounting, finance. Take a look at your LinkedIn profile and try this. Do Control F, which is the find function, and put in the word finance. And see how many times it shows up. Or put in the word accounting. See how many times it shows up. We don't know the exact, LinkedIn will not share with us what the algorithm is. But I can tell you 5 years ago, we used to be able to search for people based on only keyword or number of connections or relevancy. About 5 years ago, LinkedIn said, you know what, we're only going to show it to you based on relevancy, and we don't know what that is. But we have a really good idea that it has something to do with terms that are contextually anchored in sentences. Not just the blasting of all these key words, but how is it used in a sentence? So think about, and I think probably the toughest LinkedIn profiles to write are the ones for PR people and marketing people, because they want to write it in a certain way. And I tell them, think about it as if you wrote an English paper and you got it back with red ink on it that said verbose, right? Because I want you to tell us in a narrative. We're interested in, the things that we're interested in that helps us find you. We're interested in, do you have the right title? Do you have the right scope? Are you at the right level? Is it the right size company? Is it in the right industry? Are you hitting those things? Because our client is saying to us, get me somebody in a company that is about this size, that is a SaaS-based software type. You know what I'm saying? We get real specific. Or they're in banking or financial services. Even though we say, well, you know, my skill sets are industry agnostic, the client companies that we're working for are paying us to find the needle in the haystack. They get very, very specific, right? I'm just saying, be found, right? So here's the example. Expertise includes managing short and long-term financial and strategic planning, ROI analysis, capital budgeting, cost management, internal controls, external, internal. I made this person up, right? I like to put in here specialties and industries. What are my specialties? Financial reporting and GAAP compliance, international and multi-site financial control, strategic planning and analysis, business process improvement, budgeting, annual planning, capital planning, utilization, internal controls and SOX compliance, mergers, acquisition, divestment, right? So start thinking about, and again, you get 2,000 characters. I'm only limited based on what I could fit on the screen here, okay? Yes?
You said that it's relevance thing. Is that why that list, I've seen where the specialties are just listed, but you're putting it in a paragraph?
I put it in a paragraph form.
And why, and is that because you think that?
I think it makes more sense in more of a sentence as opposed to, we think,
Does it
we
increase the LinkedIn's relevance?
we think so.
Okay.
Okay, we think so because, I mean, think about it. You ever heard of white fonting on a resume? You know what that I'm talking about? Is where people will submit a resume to an applicant tracking system. And at the bottom, they've got all the keywords, and they're in size 2 font, and they take and highlight the text and make it white to try to trick the applicant tracking system.
Okay.
So because what it does is it parses the data, right? And it tries to pull out key things. Well, the optical character recognition and the parsing, they've gotten smart enough to say this is just a load, you know, somebody's just, they can tell this stuff. I don't know if LinkedIn is the same way, but a lot of us seem to think that, right? So the more in the narrative, you know, you can do a couple of them like that if you want, but I would say when you're writing your profile in general, we believe that it's more contextually anchored, right? So writing the sentences, yes?
Matt, how do your endorsement and your skills play into this thing?
I love endorsements and I love skill endorsements. You know why? Because I try to recruit those people too. I highlight those people to see who's endorsing you, and maybe it's an additional candidate because they know and they're in the same industry. But I got to be honest with you, I think I put a lot more credibility into the actual written as opposed to just saying, Matt knows this. And I tried this one time. I wanted to see exactly, and Jim knows this story, because I created a skill set. I said I was fully proficient in Zulu warfare. I got 25 endorsements. Right? So it's just, and I saw LinkedIn do this, and I thought, what are they doing? And I talked to a guy at LinkedIn. I said, what are you guys trying to do? He says, we're trying to drive more engagement. I said, you guys are trying to be like Facebook. It's like a like button. So that's kind of what was happening. They were trying to build more engagement. And I think they're up to 390 million profiles now. I wish there was a way that we could take people off that we know are deceased. It's kind of creepy, because I see a lot of people out there that I know personally. And I've even sent an obit to LinkedIn and said, could you take this down? And they don't do it. So, but I get back to this. In your headline, take a look, and I bet you guys have taken stuff out of your CV or your resume and just lifted it and put it in. But go back and think about it and say, am I really using the words that reflect the functional vernacular or my particular nichiness and my industry expertise? Because we're going to go, if we're looking for a CFO, maybe we're going to say Chief Financial Officer, 50 miles of 60606, right? And then we also would put in maybe target companies, or maybe we don't put in target companies, right? But we're going to be looking for key things, like maybe we're looking for somebody that's in a private equity backed or a portfolio company. So I've seen people that have said, get me somebody that has worked with a family-owned business, because there's different dynamics of how do I put all the siblings into the areas where they can do the least amount of damage, right? So specialties, financial reporting and GAAP compliance, right? Industries, tell us the industries. Manufacturing, distribution, warehousing, retail, pharmacy, drugstore. I made this guy up, right? But tell us the industries that you've played in. It surprises me the number of profiles that don't say this is the industry. Also, you'll see on LinkedIn it'll ask you the industry at the top of your profile. And people blow this all the time. They put in the function as opposed to the industry. You'll see a CFO, right? And it'll say finance and accounting. And you go, wait a minute, this person works for BP. Isn't it oil and gas? So I don't really do a lot of searching by industry. And not only do we use all different kinds of tools to find you. We're going to use this. We're going to use Zoom Info as one of my favorites because it gives me contact information. It's pretty good. So, yeah.
For
those of us who started before you did 1984, prior to that,
Mhm.
I could probably fill up the whole 2,000 characters, I think that's what it says.
Yeah.
With specialties. How do you decide what specialty you want to put in there? I mean, I've been in banking, but that was a company that doesn't exist anymore.
Whatever you're comfortable with. And one of the things that you can also do is you can do an exercise that I call listening to the market. Okay? Use the vertical job search engine, Simply Hired or Indeed, and go out and put in what your title is and maybe an industry, and take a look at what's out there. Maybe print out the specs. This is a trick that recruiting firms will use also. Or I used it when I was running HR for a company. I was trying to come up with a job description. I'd go out and I'd ping and I go, yeah, we're looking for somebody like this. Oh, here's one that was written by General Electric. They got an army of comp people that do nothing but job analysis. This looks like a solid one. I'll borrow pieces from this one, right? But if you start printing out some of these things, laying them out and circling or highlighting, you can do this listening to the market exercise, saying, what is the market looking for? Does that make sense? So that's one of the ways to figure out, from a relevancy standpoint, what people are really looking for, right? What's hot, okay?
Yeah, but from the standpoint of, and maybe this is a weakness, but in terms of, well, I could never do banking again because that's decades.
It's not gonna. You want to play on your strengths, right? Play on your strengths.
So the currency would be also important.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Matt, question, is there any hierarchy in your profile around where the words need to be for searches to find you, or is
It's throughout, and I proved this one day because I put in there just for fun. My high school, I went to Glenbrook North in Northbrook, and I put in world renowned for powder puff football. If you guys remember I was in Singapore watching on CNN my high school getting in trouble for having illegal games and drinking and all that fun stuff. But I put it on there just for fun, and I told somebody, I said, go look on LinkedIn for the word powder puff, 50 miles of Chicago, and tell me if anybody comes up. And I came up first. It finds it. Okay, it's in there. I was just doing a test, and it was kind of for fun. So
Matt, to back up, from a headline standpoint,
Yeah.
talk about title, CFO, CAO.
Yeah.
Mine, for example, just says senior financial executive. And it's got other things in it, but it doesn't have either CAO or CFO. They do have CAO, CFO
Right.
later on in my titles.
right,
So is the head,
fix it.
what's the headline?
What do you think?
If you want to be more searchable, you should have title.
Yeah. Because people do that all the time. They'll say seasoned financial executive in the headline. Man, you're killing. Your real estate is 120 characters, and you're not. You want to have that title up front, because you may show up, but instead of being on page 30 of the search, how can we get you closer to page 5? Because LinkedIn Recruiter lets you see thousands of results. The non-paid version, you see anybody on a non-paid version? And raise a hand. Anybody on a non-paid version? Okay. Here's the problem with the non-paid version if you're really trying to network. You're only able to see the first 100 results. Okay? And then what LinkedIn will do is they'll send you this nasty little message saying, you've approached the commercial use maximum. And they start to blur your results. This is if you're doing a lot of searching. And so now you see the first 5 and everything else is blurred. This is what LinkedIn is doing to try to get you to get on a premium account. And I got to be honest with you. A premium account, I think, is worth it. I was paying $50. I think it's $50 a month. I just said, here's for a year. Bought it, right? And you get up to 700 results. Okay, you get up to 700 results. So if you haven't tried the premium version, and I'm not a spokesperson for LinkedIn, you can try it free for 30 days. You can shut it off. If anybody is a veteran, on Veterans Day, they put something out saying if you're a veteran, they give it to you for a year for free. So check that out, okay? So this was the summary. You may want to go back and look at your summary. Make sure you've got the vernacular. What I like to see also is on your profile, when you talk about your experience, I like to break the experience into 2 pieces. You know when you go into LinkedIn and you put your company name in there and you roll over the icon of your company, up pops JavaScript that tells you this is what the company does, and it lists all the different things, right? You've seen that when you go to somebody's profile and you roll your cursor over the name of the company. The problem is that is not searchable. All those words in the JavaScript is not searchable. So when I look for something that might be a keyword in that description, it's not searchable, okay? So my suggestion is because, and to be honest with you, the entry point into retained search typically is in a researcher mode. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I've seen, I mean, last year I was looking for a research manager, right? And I started looking through all the profiles of researchers, and I noticed Egon Zehnder hired 5 people that year as researchers. And you know what they did before they were researchers? They were theater majors. They were people that were creative people. They were looking for creative people to come in, and they trained them, right? So what does that mean? They're greenhorns. They don't know if you've done X, Y as a subset of that. They don't know that. They have to be trained. They have to learn it. They may not be up on all the nuances of who the right target companies are. So my suggestion is that you tell us a little bit about your company. Maybe it's one paragraph telling us about what your company does. So-and-so company designs, develop, manufactures, and what is it? Is it a global company? Is it privately held? Is it publicly traded? Is it family owned? How big is it? What are the revenues? How many employees does it have, right? And I'll give you an example. When I was talking to a gentleman with McDonald's Corporation, he had a responsibility for global POS, point of sale terminals, right? In his first paragraph, he started talking about McDonald's, and then he also kind of leveraged it towards what he did. And he said, the company has a robust infrastructure of point of sale equipment. On average, the company has 7 POS terminals per store, PRINs, how many stores times. And it gives you an idea of the scope of what he had to deal with throughout the entire international or global McDonald's system is in terms of POS devices. And then he also listed the names of the POS devices, right? I've seen people in sales that talk about their company and then how the company goes to market. The company sells its products to OEMs, including Apple, Kyocera. I could just see in sales, get me somebody who's sold to, right? So they leverage it that way. Yeah.
So, and if you're worried about, you're with a company, you're worried about how you describe your own company and your own LinkedIn profile.
Yeah.
Every company's got a website, and usually it has an about us. There's the capsule right there that the company wants people to know what they're about.
From a branding.
So that can be a safe way to describe your company, but then I'm not sure how that fits in.
Well, what I'm saying is you also may want to put in there, like for example, there's companies out there that do software as a service, which is hot. And they don't say SaaS. I'm saying, man, use the terminology. This is just, and you guys can go, you can look at this later, but by the way, on the time periods here, did you know that where it asks you for the months, it's a discrete drop-down box that says choose, then it says January through December. If you leave it on choose, it suppresses the month. So if you have a profile where you might have some gaps or whatever, and you just want to be consistent, if you want to do all the earlier stuff just based on years, do it that way, right? And you don't have to go back in the time machine. I think finance people have this special dilemma, and Jim and I have talked about this because it's tough because people say, get me somebody that's come through a public firm and then has gone in. And so it's pretty much you graduated, you were recruited on campus by one of the big whatevers, can't even keep track of the number, right? And then you went into a business, and so by default you tell us how old you are, right? So it's kind of that tough thing, and recruiters like to do math. And some people don't want to have their age in there, right? So let me go on to the next here. This is what I'm talking about is, Jim had mentioned this, go to the website, but I like to just put in the name of the company followed by the word Business Week because Bloomberg Business Week does a pretty good job of pulling information on companies. And so if you did that with Walgreens, you get this long thing. And of course, this has changed since the last time I looked at it, right? It's Boots, right? So, but you get all this raw data, and there's nothing wrong with taking that, throwing it in a Word document, and then wordsmithing it based on your knowledge of the operation. Right? So it's really interesting. Depending on function, like for example, people in procurement, their yardstick for purchasing, it's always, well, what's your annual spend? right? HR people is how many sites did you have? How many people did you have? Was it union, was it non? So you have to start thinking about some of the triggers. Think about if you were hiring your replacement. How would you what are some of the metrics that you have kind of in your mind in terms of what's important, right? So we want to do a paragraph on the company. So this is an example, and I hope you like my salt shaker of nouns. Be thinking about that. How can I drop nouns? Because nouns are key words. And you don't know if the researcher is putting in the word, I got to have somebody that's been in a retail environment. I got to have somebody that has the word stores. I have to have somebody that has the word pharma, right? You don't, I mean, start thinking about, and maybe they haven't targeted the company, right? So this is just an example of how maybe you might describe Walgreens. So think about the nouns.
Use that on
Huh?
LinkedIn.
Don't put the salt shaker on there. But I want you to also think about this. Anytime that you have an opportunity to restate your job title, it's a way to cheat, and it's a way to push you further to the front of the search dynamic. So I say in here, in the second paragraph, as the Director of Finance, report to the VP Finance and Administration and manage day-to-day operations of the Corporate Finance Department, direct the team of 30, and again, I made this up. I have no idea this is true, right? Through multiple finance and accounting managers, oversee the accounting general ledger system, including payroll, blah, 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 right? You notice that there's no accomplishments in here? Because remember, this is a branding statement. This is we're interested in scope and level, right? You want to attract recruiters enough where they say, this guy has the right title, he's got the right scope, right? We should talk to this person. We should reach out to this person. Jim, tell me more, right? This is what I'm working on. Man, that sounds really interesting, Matt. Can you do me a favor? I know you probably put a spec together. Can you send me the spec? Let me take a look at it. Let me think about it. I might know somebody. Jim calls you back. I thought of somebody. Who's that? Me, right? In the meantime, he's had an opportunity to look at the spec. So what is he doing with the resume that's written in Microsoft Word? Got the spec, my resume. I better change that, right? So that's what you want to do. You want to use this as a platform. You want to use this as a platform to be found. So continue the same pattern. You don't have to go back in the time machine. It's a thumbnail sketch, but I'm just saying, if you have a chance to restate your job title, and it's even better when you go back because let's say you're looking for a director of finance. Earlier jobs, maybe you were a manager of financial accounting and you reported to a director of finance. As the manager reported to the director. So you're cheating by stating your old boss's title. Get it? So anytime that you can put your title in there or the titles of people that are on your team, you know, you can leverage that, or the functions that you are responsible for, or maybe you're responsible for. And some people will say, well, I want to put at least one of these accomplishments in, or I have a real strong background in driving ERP implementations. Well, if you're going to say something like that, please tell us if it's Oracle or SAP, or if you have experience in different financial softwares. You may want to somewhere indicate those because get me somebody that knows X is always on the table, right? So it makes sense? Any questions so far? It's just a different way of looking at it. I mean, I think a lot of people are lifting and putting in what's in their resume. That's pretty much on the optimization piece, okay? You guys can download this stuff. This is the piece on, I've been told to network, who do I call, right? And what I like to do, and I like to use this guy. This guy's name is George Boole, right? Algebraic logic, Boolean logic. We do, and LinkedIn supports, these different types of operators. The and, the or, and the not. This is important for you guys when you're doing searches because what I want you to think about is how many times have people told you that you've connected to, gosh, let me know if there's anything I can ever do to help you, right? So they just took the ball and threw it back in your court. What I want you to do is to throw it way back into their court because they're willing to help you as best they can. They just don't know how, right? So when you go to advanced search on LinkedIn, if I was looking for people that were on boards and I wanted to try to talk to people that were on boards, I might put in my job title, board or chief or chairman or audit committee. Does this make sense? Or compensation committee, because those people are going to have those kinds of titles. Or if I was looking for anybody that was in a leveraged title within a target company, I might put VP or vice or VP or PP or CEO or chief executive or chief financial. Or you see how we're going here? Managing director, European companies, a lot of them are managing directors, right? Private equity and venture capital, they're using the word principal or managing director quite a bit, right? So if I was going to, let's say I had a listing of targeted companies, right? Maybe there's 20 or so that I would be really interested in maybe potentially working for. I could target the top person and I could also put in the company, and then maybe I sorted it by zip code and said I'm only interested in companies that are within maybe a 75-mile radius of a zip code, right? And when I run my search, I also want to see people that are only in my first or second degree. Why is that? What happens to people that are in your third degree? Too far out, weak relationships, right? So the idea is to run a search on companies that you are specifically interested in, that you're targeting. And it could be also, if you're a CFO and you have certain banks that you want to look at, because a tremendous amount of opportunity comes through banking, right? Where people say, we need a CFO, this other company needs a CFO, do you know of anybody, right? So if you want to start broadening your network in different banks, maybe you put in the names of banks as targets and top roles within banks to see how you might be connected to somebody in a fairly leveraged role. Does that make sense? So, and by the way, I actually, where it says try this, I actually ran this search in LinkedIn. So if you open up your browser in LinkedIn and you click on that little link and you have your browser open in LinkedIn, it'll run that search for you, right? But here's an example of how I might target top financial people. You see how I put the word finance, F-I-N-A-C-A-N-C? I don't even put I-A-L or E, because I'm grabbing that title, right? So that might be how I might do it. But see, writing these things, this can be kind of a pain, because you can't have any missing spaces. So how do I do this? Is there a better way to do this? And everybody in this room has used Excel and loves Excel, right? Right. So here we use Excel to construct Boolean strings, and you got screenshots here. So try this, okay? But I use a function called the concatenate function. You see how I put maybe my target companies over on the left? And then in column B, I put a quotation mark. In column C, I put a space, capital O, capital R, space. And all I'm doing is concatenating. It's a text function called concatenate. It joins strings of text. This is what happens. That's your resulting concatenation, see? So now I can go and I can just copy this. I'd have to backspace over the or down here, right? I put it in parens, right? And then I throw it into LinkedIn and say this company or this company or this company or this. Maybe I do 5 at a time, right? But if I've got a listing of 100 targets, I'm pushing towards those targets, right? And so that's this is the actual step-by-step. Plus I give you a YouTube video to watch on how to do this in case you don't know how, right? A little bit more make sure it's under current company, current title, zip code radius, limit your search to first and second degree connections, adjust the parameters. I mentioned tiny URL. Have you guys ever tried to save a search that you liked in LinkedIn? How many times does it let you save a search? Once, right? Here's a way to cheat. Go to tinyurl.com. It's a link shortening program. When you go to tinyurl.com, you'll see down here it says add it to your browser's toolbar. All you got to do is drag it and drop it on your toolbar. I can't speak to how this works on a Mac, but I can tell you on Windows it's fine. It may work on a Mac. You'll have to test it out. But here's the thing. You run a search in LinkedIn that you like. I like this search. Click tinyurl. It takes the 2,000 character, because the URL from your search is probably 1,500, 2,000 characters. and it crushes it down to 26. And then you can copy the URL and paste it somewhere and run it again just by clicking on it. Does that make sense? So it's a way to do that. And so what I've done is and here's an example of a research document. I got non-manufacturings with more than 200 employees. There's the concatenation. And then leverage titles, right? I've run those searches in LinkedIn, saved it as a tiny URL. You could actually click on that link and it'll take you to those companies, right? But I did that research, and I thought was important is to share. These are all target companies. I've got private equity firms for a PE campaign. If you go, this will take you to an Excel document, and you can download it. This is from 2013. It's non-manufacturing companies with at least 200 employees. Chicago manufacturing companies. So basically, I looked at something called an NAIS code and said, show me anybody that doesn't have the manufacturing prefix. There may be some nonprofits in there, right? Show me anybody that has the manufacturing prefix that has at least 200 employees. So those are all in the spreadsheet, but also is the company's address, their phone number, their website, if it has a key administrator, what the products are described. Fortune 1000, I can't remember how far I got on that one. There's VC that are Chicago, and then there's also, I just did one very recently and said, show me all the companies that have, maybe it's 500 employees or better, that are either in DuPage or Cook County. And you guys can sort by county, right, if you want to target. But at least you got targets, right? And you can manipulate, you can filter the Excel document, you can figure out what you want just to get your targets, and then start pushing, right? If you have a listing from Cranes in Excel, right? Maybe you got banking, or maybe you have your own target listing. Try doing this. If you've got a target listing of companies that are on your handbill, put them in Excel, concatenate them, throw them into LinkedIn, and start looking at who would I want to talk to that has a highly leveraged role within that company. Start looking at the results, right? So as you start looking at your results, and you see people and you say, this person looks like they're in a highly leveraged role. How am I connected to them? Oh, I see that they know my friend Jim Patterson. So what do? I pick up the phone and I call Jim and I say, Jim, I'm trying to broaden my network in manufacturing, in the manufacturing industry, in the financial area. How well do you know so-and-so at XYZ company? I know them pretty well. Do they seem like they're pretty wired into what's going on? Absolutely, they're involved in many industry associations, et cetera. Do you think they're the kind of person that might meet with me for a cup of coffee? Right? Does this make sense? Great. So now, two things I've done. I've gotten back in touch with Jim, which I needed to do, right? I got back on his radar. What else should I be doing, Jim? Maybe Jim has some additional advice, right? Now that I'm telling him that I'm looking at people like this, right? Maybe he's going to give me a name or two. But also, he can help grease the skids. He can help introduce me to somebody. So this comes to the third piece, wrapping some metrics around it. Here is the networking goal, right? 6 to 8 points a day. And this is very helpful, especially when you have a significant other. Many of you have CFOs at home, right? So 1 point for every referral that you get to a key contact hiring manager. Okay, so by picking up the phone and calling Jim and saying, can you help me? I get 1 point by calling Jim, right? Then I call the person because Jim told me to call him and we connected. I get 2 points when I set up a meeting. 3 points when I have the meeting, 4 points for every bona fide job interview with a search firm. So try to push, get in that 25 point a week type thing, right? But at least it'll give you some metrics. There's no points for applying to positions online because it makes us feel good. I did this. How many other people did that? 300? Right? So this only, and Kathy, tell me, what's the key? Networking, right? But the problem is, coach will say, you got to network, and people say, okay, who do I call? So why not use You got 300 connections on LinkedIn. These are people that have said, hey, great, good to meet you. Let me know if I can ever help you, right? This is the way to do it. Here's a possible phone approach, okay? Hoping you can help me. I'm looking to broaden my professional network, blah, blah. I notice you're connected to so-and-so, right? That's just a technique, a method. I think it's important that as you go out to network, and I had this discussion with a friend of mine, and he tends to look at people as either givers or takers. Because we see people that come out of the woodwork every 5 years and they network like crazy, and then they're gone. You call them, they don't call you back, right? They're gone. And then they pop up 5 years later. Takers, right? What you want to do is, and I can't tell you how many times I have helped people and their kids, because kids don't listen to their parents. And they're like, would you talk to my son, right? I can't tell you how many times that happens about trying to give advice to a 20-something, right, that's not listening to the parents. It happens all the time. Offer to add value to your connections network. Help them or others that they know. Continue to build the network even after you've landed, right? Volunteer, get involved in industry groups like this one. Great industry group, right? Remember, the time to dig a well is not when you're thirsty. And there's some homework, right? But that pretty much sums up. There's the presentation again. And I hope you guys find this helpful. Okay? Did we do it?
We did it.
All right. On time?